Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar from all across the world. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box, and I would invite Ayana, who is our moderator for the event, to start.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I just want to welcome all the Millennium Fellows to the webinar. And this morning's webinar or evening, depending on where you are, we will be having a conversation with Mr. Sam Vaghar. So I'm just encouraging all of you guys to introduce yourselves in the chat box, and you can just share your name, the country that you're in at the moment, and the university that you attend. And you can feel free to unmute and introduce yourself if you're comfortable, if you don't just want to put it in the chat box.
I think we can go ahead and start, Ayana.
So any fellows interested in speaking about their emerging technology project? If you're interested, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute. Okay, so for today, as I said, we're going to be speaking with Mr. Sam Vaghar. So before I start, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ayana Robinson, and I'm from Barbados, but I'm currently in Jamaica, and I'm studying at the University of the West Indies, Mona. So Mr. Sam Vaghar is a social entrepreneur committed to helping young people own their voice and power to make a difference. With 15 years of impact, co-founding and leading Millennium Campus Network. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 2008 from Brandeis University and a Master in Public Administration degree from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 2021. During his studies at Harvard, Sam was selected as a Gleitzman Fellow at the Center for Public Leadership. Sam has received 2 honorary degrees and also served as a commencement speaker at Monmouth College in 2020. His work, writing, and contributions have been spotlighted by the Boston Globe, CNN, Fast Company, and more publications. Sam has given talks at over 100 institutions worldwide, including at Harvard University, MIT, the White House, the United Nations, the Vatican, and on speaking tours across 4 nations for the U.S. Department of State. In addition, Sam has served on multiple boards, including serving as an advisor to the Executive Director of UN Women. So now I invite Sam to just give us a brief introduction of himself in addition to this, if he so chooses, and to give us some keynote remarks.
Thank you, Ayana. It's wonderful to be with you, and wonderful to be with all of you. Wow, I am absolutely blown away, Millennium Fellows, by each of you. Just seeing the chat box, how many campuses and countries you all are joining in live from. And I'm going to try and keep my comments short. I want to engage you all and really in this hour be as of service to you. I'm here to support you in your social impact work and journeys. I don't have all the answers, so I'll say that up front, but I think collectively we do have a lot of answers. So I hope that I can be a resource, but also that you all in the chat box and when appropriate unmuting can also be a resource for each other. As Ayana mentioned, my name is Sam Vaghar. He, him, Boston is home, and this is my 16th year with Millennium Campus Network, MCN. I think for a little bit of context, I'll share with you how this movement started. This all started when I was 19, and I'll even say prior to that, in high school, secondary school, I was quite shy. I didn't have many friends. I didn't really fit in. I didn't know my purpose. I struggled, honestly, at times, and I felt really lonely at times and on the outside at times. And I don't know if any of you maybe put in the chat box, but if you're comfortable sharing it, which ironically you might not, but are any of you more of an introvert than an extrovert? If you are, just write introvert in the chat box, because I'll just share with you that that's what I experienced, particularly in high school. Yeah, for you all, yeah. So the good news is I'm seeing in the chat is there's a lot of us out there. I'm not alone. Ambivert, that's pretty cool, Colin. I'm not alone. I know there's a lot of introverts in the world, but sometimes we're hidden. Sometimes we're a little bit harder to find. And so for me, that was definitely a challenge. And I spent a lot of time just kind of trying to find myself. And I went to Brandeis University as an undergrad, barely made it into the university. And when I did, I just focused on socializing at first. And then I read 2 books that changed my life. One book that I always recommend to people, I'll put it in the chat. It's Mountains Beyond Mountains. And Mountains Beyond Mountains tells the story of a doctor, the late Paul Farmer, and an organization, Partners in Health. I so recommend this book. No story is perfect. No single story is perfect, but this one really effectively tells the story of a doctor who stole medical supplies from Harvard, volunteered in Haiti, became a doctor, worked more than 35 years in 12 countries in the movement for global health equity. And so learning about Partners in Health, then reading a book, The End of Poverty. Between these 2 books, Mountains Beyond Mountains and The End of Poverty, I found purpose. I realized that amongst all the challenges in the world, there are areas that Paul talks about in Mountains Beyond Mountains of moral clarity, where you can step in, make a difference, even in the smallest of ways, even as an individual. And so at 19, put down those books, picked up the phone, cold emailed Professor Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia University, who wrote The End of Poverty. Went down to Columbia University 2 days later, met with his team. I said, look, I'm a sophomore at Brandeis University. I don't have many answers, but I know we as students can do more. I know young people have power and agency, and I want to figure out how we could be partners in, at the time, advancing the UN Millennium Development Goals, the predecessor to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We started small public health fundraisers on our campus, really small, like bake sales and concert tickets, and just little things that we could do to raise a little bit of money for anti-malarial bed nets. And so we raised that money, I think $5,000, which was significant for us. It kind of gave us a proof point that there was something real. And then we convened students across the city of Boston. We said, look, we're all at different universities, but we're all committed to these goals, but we're working in isolation. And working in isolation, it, fragmented, it limits our power, but together we can do so much. And what would it look like if we collaborated? And 6 months later, we had our first summit at MIT, and 1,000 student leaders showed up from around the world. And Paul Farmer, the doctor I mentioned, was there. And Jeffrey Sachs, the economist, was there. And the singer, some of you may have heard of, John Legend, he joined as well. And all these global leaders joined in. They joined the board of advisors. They said, we're in, let's help you build this student network. I said, I'm 20 years old. I'm not sure what we're doing just yet, but let's give this a shot. And so we started Millennium Campus Network 16 years ago in our dorm rooms as a platform for undergraduates making a difference. what you all are doing in your communities, but also how you are committed to reflection and introspection and growth and growing together and learning from each other and sharing with peers. That was the dream 16 years ago. And you all are that dream. And you're defining new dreams in ways that I could never have anticipated. I never would have thought back when we started that there would be a platform like this to connect virtually with peers around the world. And so I'm really excited that, the Millennium Fellowship, which started a decade ago, obviously next week at graduation, we'll celebrate the 10th anniversary. And I remember when this program started, there were 11 Millennium Fellows the first year. And here we are with over 4,000 Millennium Fellows this year. And so all I'd say to kind of open up the dialogue is great movements and great initiatives and progress often start small. And so for any of you who are leading a grassroots community initiative or partner on one, and maybe you're wondering, like in the back of your mind, maybe you're like, well, where is this going to go? Does this matter? It does. It really does, because it can grow into something much larger, because even if it doesn't, you can learn so much that you apply to the next community initiative, the next partnership, and probably for many of you, social impact careers. So we're really excited at MCN to be on this journey with you, not just this semester, but as alums, to continue to support your social impact journeys, to invite you and call you in as alums to continue to support this network of future Millennium Fellows. I'm sure some of you will also reapply to join again next year as fellows. And obviously grateful to UNAI for partnering on this program, helping it grow around the world, and just a huge thank you. So I'm excited. That's pretty much everything I wanted to say today. I'm really excited just to, obviously connect with you, Ayana, and then for all the Millennium Fellows here as well. Just be a resource, hear about what you're working on, what you're thinking about, and think together. Thank you, everyone.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for those comments, Sam. I think they set a really inspiring tone for this morning, especially reminding us that even though we're starting, from a very small place and as young students, that it can materialize into something so much bigger, as you would have mentioned with the MIT Summit. So we really appreciate those remarks to start us off. And now we're going to go into the Q&A session. So every person's journey in social impact is unique. What would you say had inspired you in this journey of youth leadership and social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are many different things that I think a lot about personally. One thing I'll just share is you never know somebody's whole story, but you get closer to knowing who they are by listening. And no one would know this just from hearing me speak, but there are things that really impacted me as a young person. One of those things was I was 11 years old, and it's a little graphic, but I hope it's okay that I share. I was 11 years old, and all of a sudden I went to the bathroom and I looked in the toilet, and there was blood in the toilet, and I didn't understand why, but I started to that happened more and more frequently, and then I started to really experience a lot of pain in my stomach to the point where it was difficult for me to eat, to the point where if there was food on the table, just smelling the food, I was lying on the ground, writhing in pain. And I came to find out that I had something called Crohn's disease, which is chronic. It's, you know, lifelong, but it can be treated. And I was 11 years old when that happened. And so it taught me at a really young age that, you know, I'm not invincible, I'm human, that healthcare really matters, that quality healthcare really, really matters. And so I think that gave me context for when I learned about, as I mentioned, Mountains Beyond Mountains and Paul Farmer and Partners in Health, the idea of healthcare as a human right. I intuitively connected more with that just because I understood why healthcare mattered so much. So that's something I think that gave me some personal inspiration. Two is reading philosophy. I read a lot of philosophy in high school. Kant, Nietzsche, a bunch of different philosophers. And I was kind of going through an existential crisis to try to understand why we're here on the planet and what's real. Like, it'll sound kind of surreal, Ayana, but it's like, you know, is this wall really here? Is the table really here? How do you prove that definitively? And for me, reading philosophy kind of at times gave me more questions than answers, but then learning about inequities in public health, and learning that there are real things like whether it's vaccines or bed nets or, you know, investing in healthcare workers and community health workers, like there are things that really work. And so knowing that and knowing the level of inequities and injustice in the world, like that gave me such clarity that, okay, there's something that can be done. There are many other things I think that have contributed and shaped just my journey. And I have parents from England and Iran. They're from two different faiths, two different cultures. Really, just the fact that their love, they were able to kind of come together. Didn't honestly have a lot of family around at the time. Like they just kind of went for it. And myself, my brother are a manifestation of that love. It just gives me also the context to think globally. I think I was like thinking globally from when I was a little kid because of them. Yeah, these are some of the influences I think early on that really shaped me. And yeah, there are many others, but these are at least a couple of things that yeah, that made me think about injustice, bridge building, connection, and how we create a more just world.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. I think the running thread in all of them was the importance of knowledge, that when we know through our experiential knowledge the difficulties of life, as you would have said with your chronic disease, you know, it builds a sense of sympathy with other people. And as you would have said, just philosophy and asking questions about the world and seeing where there are those inequities and inequalities. And as you would have mentioned earlier, that we do have this potential to have this sense of agency and to help those things. And as well as you said, with the global outlook and trying to see that there is this ability to be open-minded and see even beyond what you know and what you have experienced, which I think is really important for us as Millennium Fellows. So secondly, you wrote in your article about International Youth Day that it is not just a celebration. It is a bellwether, a telescope to see the future through the lens of people not yet jaded by cynicism. In your experience, how have you seen young people subvert structures of oppression and injustices that have challenged the notion that change is impossible?
It's a great question. I'm gonna throw that op-ed actually in the chat, just so if anyone wants to check it out, they can. Yeah, it's happened throughout history. Probably the example that I look to most is, I would say, aside from Paul Farmer, probably the singular, like the best role model that I look to, Ella Baker. and her work was SNCC. So I don't know how, if everyone has the context of the civil rights movement in the US. Obviously, we have a long history with slavery and Jim Crow and racist policies. And in the 50s, 60s, you had the growth of and proliferation of an amazing civil rights movement to tackle desegregation. And it's incredible because these young people were organizing on campuses, and Ella Baker, she was like the Martin Luther King Jr. had SCLC, so he had his own organization, but and mostly it was reverends, but they had like one staff person, that's it, and the one staff person was Ella Baker. Then she helps bring these young people together. I think at Shaw University, April, I think 1960, if memory serves. And when they come together, she was adamant that these young people have their own independent student organization. So a lot of the different civil rights leaders at the time were kind of like, oh, we want a student arm. Like, we want young people to be kind of a part of whatever SCLC or a different organization. And she's like, no. Like, I want to ensure that these young leaders have their own space, their own autonomy. They're able to contribute in the ways they want to contribute. And I want them to have resourcing. Like, I want you to put money behind them. And she was such a power player behind the scenes to make that happen. And then obviously the young leaders who came out of that, like John Lewis and Diane Nash and so many others, led throughout freedom rides and sit-ins, and were on the front lines of the movement for desegregation in the US, but then, also had decades of continuing that activism and public service throughout their lives. And so for me, like the lesson, the power in that example is not just what they were able to do on desegregation, but also that when you invest in young people and you support young people as partners, they will make decades of impact. Like, the ripple effect of that will be felt literally generationally. So there are so many examples like that. You look throughout history, and Nelson Mandela and what he was doing at a young age, and what young people were doing to tackle apartheid. And again, not to be too US centric, but because this is home, like, I know some of this history. I know in the 1980s, in the movement to end apartheid, there were at the peak 155 universities where students were mobilizing to divest from the government of South Africa. And because of that, it's not that young people organizing, ended apartheid in South Africa. Like, no, but these young people in the US doing this, as friends explained to me, really helped shape public opinion, moved public opinion. So much so that when Mandela came out of prison and came to do his first US tour, one of the places that he went to, DC, New York, etc., but he also went to Oakland, California, of all places. He chose Oakland, and it's because there, from union workers to student leaders, there were mass movements where 3 different municipalities there all divested from the government of South Africa. And like at UC Berkeley, I think there were 10,000 students coming together at a time to mobilize. So to me, I think it's like those examples. They're obviously examples in history. They're examples in present day. Sometimes it's hard to see the impact immediately, because these movements take time. Like apartheid took a long time to dismantle, even though it's so unjust. These different issues, they're difficult, they're not easy, but for me, like, what has given me a lot of confidence, and here I am 16 years in, still doing this work with young people, I just believe that young people sometimes are able to see with a degree of moral clarity. They just see things that, as you get older, maybe I'll be honest, like I have a 2-month-old at home now. So I've been with him and spending a lot of time with him. And once you have, for anyone who does and chooses to, etc., once you have like kids of your own and you're raising a family and you have all these different responsibilities, it definitely makes you think differently about what matters, what risks you can take, because you're responsible, like in my case, for a 2-month-old, like literally making sure he stays alive. And so but when you're a young person, not always, but in some contexts, I feel like young people are able to be just really innovative, really thoughtful, really passionate. And when we've seen it work really well is when there's intergenerational movements, when it's young people and older people working together. That I think historically is what has changed the world for the better. And so that's what I look to for inspiration.
Thank you very much for that response. I think it was really good that you chose the example of racism, because as the prompt goes, that you might start to think change is impossible, because racism is something that, as you said, has existed in the United States for so long, in South Africa for so long. And the fact that there are still people who are still trying to resist it shows that they still have that open-mindedness that there can be change, and that sometimes the change requires you to go against what you've been doing before, and maybe, like you said, have a student-led arm. And also talking about the fact that no man is an island, and that sometimes young people will have to partner with older generations, for example, in order to effect the change that we need. So I think that was a really inspiring response, especially with racism being such a long-lasting, pervasive system. So now I'm just going to open the floor to some of the Millennium Fellows to ask any questions you guys have. You guys can just select the raise hand feature, and then you can unmute and say your question. Okay, so I see Nato Cisse. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, my apologies. You can go ahead. Nato, you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, I'm not hearing, so I'm gonna go next to Himanshu Kishari. You can unmute and ask your question. Okay, so put it in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
I was unable to unmute myself, and now I'll ask the question, if that is okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So hi, Sam. As a social entrepreneur, we have to make difficult choices, like dealing with various stress, and as well as making difficult choices at various cross junctions. What advice would you give to current MCN fellows based on your prior experience?
Oh, it's a good question. Also, I just want to ask if you could introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about
For
you as
sure.
well.
Yeah, so I'm basically a second-year economics student at University College London, and my project revolves around forming a society at UCL that conducts entrepreneurial conferences, because I think it's a good way where UK students and across the globe can cater and meet academic excellence.
I love it. Well, thank you for your work. Yeah, in terms of stress, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers, because I get stressed all the time these days. I think one thing that grounds me for sure is just a recognition that the seemingly intractable challenges of our time do not rest on the answers of one person. So it's not on like you or me or you, Ayana, like one of us to figure everything out, to be the savior, the hero. I had a former colleague at MCN who talked a lot about this concept of heropreneurship, like going into communities thinking you need to be the savior. It's really problematic, right? And so I think that's one thing that's kind of helped me. It's like, oh yeah, even, I was on leave these last couple months from MCN, so I've missed out on a lot. And then look, like things have continued. We have a great team. They've continued to build and operate, and you all have continued the work in communities. So yeah, like the work will always be there. There's always going to be things to improve upon. But I think taking space and time away sometimes is really healthy and helpful. In whatever ways we can. That's not always possible, but finding spaces. I know different people cite meditation or different resources. For me, and this is a privilege for sure, but I have a therapist, and I'm able to see a therapist once a month, and just being able to check in and kind of download and say, this is what I'm experiencing right now. But for sure, like these are things that are really helpful. And one thing that I try to do as best I can, sometimes it's hard, but I try to like lower the temperature a little bit, because it can get so emotionally, you can get so emotionally invested, and at times it's like really emotionally draining. And so it's really, again, like not always easy to do this, but for example, stepping away from social media, because social media and media in general, so much of it is designed to incite or inspire you to feel emotions, and they're not always positive emotions. It's like trying to get you riled up and angry, and it's valid, like, but sometimes it's really valid, and sometimes it's literally algorithms working to get you to that place, and that happens all the time. So to the extent that my partner, sometimes she'll like pull me aside, and she's like, Sam, like, put your phone down, put your laptop down, step away, like take a breath. It's not helping you right now. You just need to take a breath. That's been really helpful for me. And then, just connecting with, whether it's family or friends or other community members, just those are things that have helped. I wish I had a better answer, and incidentally, like if you have resources that work for you, or if anyone else does, put them in the chat, because I'd love to. I think honestly we kind of need collective wisdom on that question to best navigate. But thank you for asking.
Thank you for the answer.
Okay, thank you very much for that question and that response. And we have a raised hand from Joram John. So you can just unmute and say your question.
Okay. Hello, Sam. I'm John from Abubakar Tafawa University, Bauchi, and um, our group project is based on
Okay, we're not hearing you. I think it went back on mute. So if you're able to, you can just unmute again and continue saying your question. If you're unable to unmute, you can just put it in the chat and I would read out the question.
Okay.
Okay, so while we're waiting, we can just go to the next person, who is Jawad Ula. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. And first of all, Sam, good morning and good evening. It is an incredibly nice to talk to Sam. And I had a question that what you would like to recommend to our local leaders, and especially local students who are just starting with their leadership, like we are now working on climate change. At the very start, we are facing certain issues like budget issues, and at the same time, engaging the people in a positive and constructive way. Sometimes people don't hear to you about whatever you are doing. So as a beginner in the leadership journey, what you would like to recommend us, Sam? Because we are just very beginner with our journey, but still we want to produce a change in our society to make some impact. So what you would like to recommend us?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, one, I'll just say right off the bat, something that's sometimes overlooked. It really frustrates me. There's two. I don't get animated about much, honestly. I try to kind of stay calm, but there's two like phrases I really don't like. One is when people say, "Oh, young people," and they say this at commencement addresses, graduations a lot. Young people, you're the leaders of tomorrow. Yeah, like tomorrow you're gonna be leaders, and it's, to me, it's so wrong because most of you, I think everyone here is 18 plus, 18 years old, 19, 20, 21, 22, 25, 27, what, which means that you have 18 or 2 decades or more of experience on this planet. You have a lot of lived experience and knowledge and insight. Sure, plenty, we all have a lot more to learn, but you bring so much knowledge, and I think like that's really important. So even though you're just starting out, maybe with your fellowship project, your initiative, maybe your first startup, you bring a wealth of knowledge to that. The second one that frustrates me is when people say like, "Oh, we're giving voice to the voiceless," and I get what they're trying to say. They're trying, because sometimes communities are marginalized and they're censored, etc. But when when people talk about giving voice to the voiceless, I'm like, well, everyone has, like, people have voice. The problem is we're not listening, and we're not creating platforms where people really have the space to share. And so it's more about power dynamics and systems than anything else. And what I say all that to say that what I'd recommend is, one, really, there's a great leader, and I put his name in the chat box, Brian Stevenson, who's done a lot of work on criminal justice and the death penalty in the US. And Brian Stevenson talks a lot about the power of proximity. And so essentially what he's saying is if you really want to create change, you really need to have trusting relationships in community, either be a part of the community that you're trying to shape, or have deep relationships with the people that you're trying to engage. Don't write about people or write for people without really knowing people, without having those relationships, or doing deep research to really understand context. And so that's what I'd say. Like, if your work is on climate, really obviously do the research, build the relationships, have that context and that knowledge, so that when you speak to others about it, you're speaking from a place of confidence, some degree of authority. Yes, some ambiguity, because all these things are really complicated, but I think that's really helped me. Like, now 16 years in, I've seen so much in the field of youth leadership development. I could talk to you all for hours and hours about it, because I've seen movements come and go. I've studied it really, like, carefully. And so I think, yeah, building on that knowledge base that you have through conversation, through research, is so helpful. And then it's that, I think we talk about in the fellowship curriculum, setting SMART goals. So having like time-bound goals that you can conceivably achieve in the next semester. So maybe you have a goal for, hey, our startup in the next 5 years can accomplish X. But you know what, team, between now and December, and then between now and June next year, or December next year, in the next 12 months, this is tangibly what success could look like for us as an organization. And then once you set that goal or set of goals, you reverse engineer, and you're like, all right, if we're trying to tackle food insecurity with 30 families in the next 6 months, and in the next 6 months, those families will no longer be food insecure. What do we need to do in the next 3 months? What do we need to do in the next month? What do we need to do in the next week? What do we need to do today? So like breaking down larger goals into smaller goals, I think is key. And once you can do that and you show you have a data point or data points that what you're doing is working, that inspires local businesses, government, potentially, university, others to potentially come on board and say, hey, we could potentially join with you in this in some way, big or small. Oftentimes, like when we talk about climate change or hunger or big issues, if we don't have that context of here's the tangible impact, people, they've heard a lot of these things before. These are problems that have existed for a long time. What gives them confidence is knowing that even in the smallest ways, you have concrete, accountable processes, change that you can in some way measure qualitatively or quantitatively. Again, as I said, the Millennium Fellowship started with 11 Millennium Fellows. It didn't start with 4,000. It was a very, very small program in Boston, but we built really tight feedback loops. We built trust with young people and just incrementally grew. And so that would be my, I'm happy to chat more one-on-one, et cetera. And I'll put my number here in the chat at the end so anyone can connect on WhatsApp. But that's at least my first thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam, for that response, and thanks for the question. And we're going to take another question now from Junaid Hassan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You can just unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Sam. My question is,
Okay, I'm not hearing, but I don't know if that's just on my
Can you hear me
side.
now? Am I audible?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. So Sam, I will be graduating this January, and I'm in somewhat in a similar situation like you, where I'm going to start my career earlier next year. So I'm already tensed about it. I'm applying to different opportunities. So my question is that I know I want to work in the social field, okay, but I'm not pretty much sure about what sector should I choose to work from. So like I'm applying to random sectors, social sectors that I'm seeing, watching. So should I just put my focus on a particular sector and just look for opportunities on that, or should I try to apply to different sectors and go and check out what works for me the best?
Which direction are you leaning towards?
Yes.
Are you more inclined to explore a lot, or are you more interested in kind of drilling down on one thing first?
I'm actually confused exactly here. And what should I do? Should I just keep on exploring, or should I just focus on a particular thing? Like I'm really keen in teaching. I like to read and learn, and at the same time, I like to teach in social welfare. In my country, education is a huge problem. So I'm connected with a few organizations that are working on education. I'm not sure. Should I change this to something else, or should I just continue on this particular sector?
Yeah, honestly, it's a great question. It's not one I can really answer because only you know for yourself. You know, you know, every person, there's what, 8 billion of us on the planet. Every person makes those decisions for yourselves. Just like no one told me go create MCN. You know what I mean? Like if you asked my parents, they wouldn't have been like, oh, create this NGO and build this thing. Like they didn't do anything like what I'm doing. So I think it would be a little presumptuous of me to tell you do X or Y. What I'll just share is that, you know, we kind of themed this talk around building your professional network. That is what I recommend. Whatever path you're going to choose, the biggest difference maker that I've seen is building professional networks. And what I mean by that is if you're interested in teaching and into education, Which are the 3 to 5, your 3 to 5 favorite organizations in the field, maybe 3 to 5 favorite leaders in the field, who's doing really innovative, inspiring work in the field that you're passionate about. Reach out to them. And how you reach out to them, I've learned from experience, sometimes it feels really hard to do, especially for introverts. It's like, oof, I don't want rejection. I don't want people to say no. What I've found, I can tell you all 16 years in, the likelihood that somebody's going to be offended that you reach out is like 0.00. It's so minimum. Like it's happened to me maybe twice in 16 years. What is more likely is you don't hear anything back, which is fine, because then it's the same position that you started out with. You have fewer contacts and no more contacts and relationships. But at best, let's say you reach out to 5 organizations and 5 leaders, maybe 8 of them don't reply, but 2 do. Then you connect with those individuals, those institutions, you have a coffee or, a tea or just meet up or do a Zoom, whatever it is, a chat over WhatsApp. You talk for 30 minutes. You ask them about their career, what they're passionate about. You learn more about that. And what's amazing in doing that is just by learning about their journey and their priority and their agenda, you then ask this simple question that I was taught to ask. Ron Cordes of the Cordes Foundation taught me to ask in every meeting. It's 5 simple words. 5 simple words are, how can I help you? How can I help you? And so a lot of times as a young person, understandably, like, we have a lot of, and every person has it in their own context, but there's a lot of needs, like need funding, need a job, need an internship, whatever it might be. But then those older people that you're trying to connect with, they have their own challenges and needs and aspirations. And so acknowledging their humanity by saying, how can I help you? What are your goals? Are there any ways I can be supportive? Just by asking that simple question, you show you value them. And oftentimes they'll then turn around and say, how can I help you? And when they ask you that question, then that's the opportunity to be like, hey, I'd love to help advance your vision. I'd love to come work at your organization. I'd love to come, grow with you, or I aspire to be in a role like yours. How do I get there? Help guide me. And then you just follow up, every couple months and check in and say, how can I help you? And what's the latest? Because maybe there's nothing immediate, but within a little bit of time, and I have many stories, and I'm even happy to stay a little bit after 11 if I can. I'm happy to share more stories in detail. But that kind of process of building your relationships and your networks, it will animate for you those different pathways. It'll illuminate the pathways. And I think then you can decide, like, do I want to be a teacher for the rest of my life? Maybe. Or maybe you want to spend 5 years as a teacher and 5 years in government or in philanthropy or in public service or in business. And that's okay. There's like no wrong answer. But I think the key is rooted in relationships. And so that's, if I could recommend one thing, that would be where to start. And honestly, as I said, I'm going to put my number in the chat. You can start with me if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question, that response. And now we're going to a question from Johnson Asianzu, and you can unmute and ask your question. Okay. Oh, okay. I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, hello everybody. I don't know if I can be heard clearly.
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm Johnson Asianzu. I'm a Millennium Fellow from Kampala International University in Uganda. And our research, our project, our Millennium Project is called Antimicrobial Resistance Awareness. So my question is going to go around building vision. And I would love to ask, when the vision of MCN came to you. Yes, of course, many a times as young people, we build visions in our minds. We want to do a lot of things, and a lot of ideas cross through our minds. But what is that one thing that kept you steadfast all through the hurdles of MC? And I mean, I'm sure there are some places where you've reached and questions have come through your mind, like, I think I should just let this go, or I don't think this was for me. But there is that one thing that kept pushing you to make us part of your vision. I would love you to help us share on that. Thank you.
I love the question. Thank you. I think I knew in high school how hard it was. At times it'll sound strange maybe to say, you know, I carry a lot of privilege. Like, I'm, white male. So from looking at me, it may not be apparent, but as a young person, I really felt isolated. I really it's hard to explain now looking back, but I really felt like I didn't belong. And for any of you who ever felt that, it's really demoralizing. And I felt that so viscerally as a young person that I never want another young person to feel that way, like alone. And so, and I think that's what has inspired me a lot, is just knowing how that feels, and then knowing that when you're trying to make a difference in your community or in the world, and you're kind of faced with the adversity or injustice, like sometimes that can feel really isolating. And so you want to know that you're not alone. And so to me, like that's why I wanted to, I felt alone. So what I craved, I think, as a young person, was community. Like, I wanted to know that there were other young people I could connect with. And yeah, I think that's what's kept me going all this time, is just to know, like, okay, if I had that experience as a young person, and I'm in one place, there's probably a lot of other young people who have their own lived experiences, and maybe you're feeling similar things. And if we can help build community to support, to build support, so people feel less alone, I think that's really powerful. And I think that's, and then if those young leaders feel supported, not only in their own lives, but to go and shape a better world, like, that's what the world needs too. And so I love that, we have this community together, and that it's not even just for us, but that it's to help shape more communities. So yeah, that's what's, I think, sustained me and motivated me all this time.
Thank you for that answer on the question. So the next question is from Asu Sejoro Stephen. So you can just unmute and ask your question. Okay, I'm not hearing you, Asu. If you can't unmute, you can just type your question in the chat. So for the purposes of time, we'll just go to the next person. Michael Eneji, I think is how you pronounce it. You can unmute and ask your question. Okay, I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear anything. I don't know if that's just on my side, but I can't hear Michael. So If you are talking, you can just type it in the chat and then I would read it out. Okay, so we can go now to Goodness. Goodness, you can ask your question.
All right. Hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So, Sam, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's a very incredible story. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Goodness Woko, and I'm a final year medical student of Afe Babalola University in Nigeria. And I and my group members, we are working on empowering the society on sexual health. Yeah, so Sam, congratulations for coming this far and really great work you're doing. Like, I'm so glad you succeeded in your path. It's not everyone that starts something like this and comes this far. So yeah, congratulations. So my question is similar to Johnson's. How confident were you that it was going to work out? Because you said you were 19 and you were in university. I mean, you were a teenager. So like, how confident were you that what you started was going to work out and come this far? And then what have you done to stay relevant and to ensure that it works out all this time? So I think you said you'll be celebrating the 10th anniversary this year. So yeah, what have you done to stay relevant and come this far? And then also I don't know if you want to share this, but like, when you become an adult, as you're getting older, you need, I guess, money, funding for, like, I don't know, to live, for your housing, renting. So I don't know, does like Millennium Fellowship, do you, like, I don't know, get paid, or do you have like a side job or something? So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, these are all great questions. What I'm gonna do at the outset here is just because I know we're technically at time, so for anyone who needs to go, totally fine. And again, a massive thank you to everyone for joining and spending this hour together and with me today. I'm gonna put in the chat. This is just my social handle and my WhatsApp number, just so you all have it and you can reach out to me anytime. Genuinely, like I'm here to support. I'm honestly I'm active everywhere, but mostly on WhatsApp for fastest reply. But Ayana, if you have to jump too, it's totally fine. But I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. And again, like, if I can be helpful getting into the kind of the little details of how do you build those professional networks, those connections that can help you maybe find that career or find the funding for your startup, your venture. Like, I want to, I'm happy to share my story, but I also want to tangibly, concretely help all of you as best I can. In terms of confidence, was I confident? No, not really. A great story that we point to a lot is when we started MCN, we had no money. We convinced student group, like our university, to give us a little bit of money, but it was really difficult. And in the first year of operation of MCN, for our organization internally, I think we raised like $5,000 US, which may or may not sound like a lot, but like trying to live in the US and build a team of $5,000 and run an organization is really a challenge. And so I was not confident. One thing I'll say that really helps is persistence. I wrote a cold email to the United Nations and I said, hey, UN, you have these goals. We're young people supporting these goals. Fund us. Basically, that's what I said. And I went and I met with them and they said, Sam, you're doing great work. Your team, everybody, it's great. But no, we're not going to fund you. And then a few months later, I tried again. I went back. I was like, look, we've made a little bit of progress. We're having meetings, conversations. Can you fund us? They're like, no, we're not going to fund you. I went back a third time. I was like, hey, like, we're continuing to make great progress. Can you fund us? They're like, no, we're not going to fund you. Then we went and we did the first conference. And so we did this first kind of conference, and you know, it was a proof point. It was a data point. We're like, look, all these young people showed up. They really believe in what we're building. And I'll never forget. So once we had like a single data point, like something to point to, we went back, we met with, I'll never forget, Anita Sharma, who was working at the UN at the time. And again, we said, like, we didn't just say, this is what we're trying to do. We're like, how can I help you? What's your agenda? What are your objectives with the Millennium Development Goals? Like, how can we support these goals? And I'll never forget, like, she mapped out what she was working on. I said, oh, maybe we could like launch a campaign around some of these goals and support. And then I said, well, you know, here's the budget that we have. And I honestly was hoping for like $2,000 or $3,000 US, like that was the dream. And she took the budget, she looked down at the budget, she looked back up at me, and she said, Sam, how about $20,000 to $30,000? And I said, 30,000 sounds great. And so that was our seed funding. That's how we launched MCN. And obviously, once we had funding from an entity like the UN, it gave credibility, it gave trust that like, oh, there's something tangible here. So all that to say that we didn't have confidence that this would work. And 16 years in terms of staying relevant, there's consistently been times where we've questioned, like, is now the time to kind of quit? And it's hard, especially for any of you who are thinking like, oh, I want to go work at a nonprofit, an NGO, etc. A lot of them, ourselves included, raising money, sustaining is always a challenge, like consistently. But I try to stay rooted and focused on what young people are doing, the ways in which you all are showing up in your communities, being able to draw inspiration from that, continue to study the field. I'm always looking at like what other organizations are doing to engage young people, and continuing to iterate and innovate. The Millennium Fellowship today is not the Millennium Fellowship of a decade ago. That program was in one city and small scale. We didn't have platforms like this to connect virtually. We hadn't built out the curriculum in the ways we have. We hadn't partnered with the United Nations Academic Impact to do a joint credential or joint certificate in the way we do. All of these different components, like we kept thinking, how do we get better and better serve and support young people? Like, how can we be the best version of ourselves and keep knowing young people really well and keep improving the support that we can provide? I think that's what's made us relevant. We keep improving, we keep asking, we keep innovating, changing, never like stay static and be like, oh, that thing we did a decade ago still is relevant today. Most organizations aren't. There's this amazing stat from, I think it's the Fortune 500 list. So random kind of side point. But when you look at companies that are on the Fortune 500 list from 50 years ago, and you ask how many of those companies are still on the Fortune 500 list 50 years later, the answer is 12%, only 12%. And that's only a 50-year time horizon. What that means is that most things aren't going to sustain, and that's okay. It's not always about like, if you want to be relevant, though, you have to keep iterating with time. You have to keep being responsive to community. And then you also have to be okay with maybe this thing won't be the answer in a decade or in whenever. And that's okay, too, as long as you made the contributions that were needed in the moment. And on the funding question, there are so many resources out there. They're just not all that accessible. And so what I encourage there is to obviously think about, if it's a social impact career, is it sustainable? Because yes, to your point, I can say this with a 2-month-old and a lot of diapers and bottles and a lot of things, like it's expensive, and just living, like, it is expensive. I didn't fully understand, and I didn't think about this when I was younger, but what I'd say is, like, there are so many social impact careers in the world that are remote, that could be a pathway, that are sustainable. I often And I'm happy to chat one-on-one about that. But there are career paths that are lesser known. Like, an example would be working for a philanthropy, I'm just throwing some top of mind, but like a Rockefeller Foundation or a Gates Foundation, or you name it. These are spaces where people are paid really well, and where lived experience and knowledge globally is really helpful, because they are truly, like, these big foundations are working around the world. But these are career paths that most people don't know how to get into. They're not that like linear and easy to access. So part of our goal with the Millennium Fellowship, and in past years, I don't know if we're doing it this year, but now that I'm back, I'm trying to make all these connections. We want all of these different pathways to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more visible, easier to kind of get on ramps to, if they're of interest to you. And then there's a particular role that I recommend to young people often, that I've seen really help young people grow their leadership and their networks. And that role, which often organizations look for young people, is a chief of staff role at an organization. And so even like you'll see major very large scale organizations, their chief of staffs are often like in their 20s or 30s, like younger. And because a lot of those roles require a ton of energy, like you have to be on for a lot of the time. But I see people in those roles do it. They're basically managing external relationships, helping a CEO or COO support relationships with the team internally. So they have their hands in a lot, like they're connected to a lot of different people and stakeholders, but they're not usually there for a long time. They're usually there for like 1 or 2 years. They give their like 2 years with that CEO, but then that CEO opens up their Rolodex. They're like, who do you need to talk to? I'm going to help you connect and build your career. If you want to go start your own venture, go to graduate school, whatever it is. So that's like a thing I've seen work really well for a lot of young people. That was a long answer, but also a long question. So I tried to hopefully cover most of it.
Okay, thank you very much for the response to the question. I saw that Asu was trying to unmute again. So I'm just going to see if he can give his question. And after Asu, we're just going to do one more question, and then we would go to closing. Asu, if you're able to unmute, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hi. Good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi.
Okay, great. Thanks so much to Millennium Fellowship and Sam. Thank you very much. My quick question is, I am an undergraduate student, like most people who are here too. But for my project, I had a community where we named Beyond Campus. And why is that most students, I think it's quite crucial for students to begin to prepare for the future and beyond the 4 walls of the classrooms. But we had challenges like students trying to balance the academics and also prepare themselves for maybe like workplace or future things. But how can you, and most especially what really resonates my project was that I had issues a lot with my grades, and it really weighed me down, and I can't really further. But I had a mindset that I could even make it better and do other things alongside with that. So what was your experience? Like, how can you say students could juggle between academics and also do things in preparing for internship, scholarship, and beyond the academic walls?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Asu. I struggled. I struggled in high school. I struggled the first year at university on this precise point, because once I got into social impact and this work, it's all I cared about. I didn't really focus on academics. I just wanted to spend all my time in community and building together. What I would say though is there's a beautiful synergy that can happen between academics and civic leadership, because they can inform each other. You can take the experiences that you're having in your civic leadership and apply it in some coursework, as something to cite, as an example to reflect on and learn from. And likewise, you can apply academics to the work you're doing. So picking courses when feasible that are aligned with the work you're doing in community, and picking work in community that aligns with your area of study, that can be really powerful. That's what I did. I studied international relations in undergrad. And so rather than talking theoretically about geopolitics in the world, I was rooting papers and my thesis in the work I was doing with young people. And that was really, really helpful. So I think that's one way to approach it. I certainly don't have the whole answer. And if anyone else does, put it in the chat, because I'm sure you're not the only one thinking about how to balance these things. I'd also just say, like, for lack of better words, like, I think it's a fairly fair thing to say, like, prioritize yourself. And so, you don't want to be in a position where you're really struggling, like you're so invested in one thing that you're struggling with the other components or facets of life. You want to be able to, like, if academically there's some challenges, devote some extra time there, and if that means taking a step back from a leadership role in an organization, and rather than being president, you're vice president, or rather than being vice president, you're just like a regular member who shows up once a week or every couple of weeks, honestly, I think that's okay. Like, you want to make sure you're in a place where you're feeling really good about, where you're at, like how you're showing up in the spaces that you want to be in, and that that you've signed up for. So yeah, it's a great question. If others have, like I said, insights, throw them in the chat, because I know it's one I struggled with too.
Okay, thank you for that very relevant question and detailed response. So we're just gonna do one more question. So I see Colin Fuerte has the hand up.
All right, so good evening, especially to you, Sir Sam. Before I ask the question, I just like to say, I'm absolutely grateful for, co-founding this platform with MCN and all, and bringing us all together here. It's, for me, I think at least, it's just crazy to say the least, because I can't even wrap my head around the numbers that this whole thing is able to put up, the amount of people that you've been able to bring together all these years. And like you said, the 10th anniversary, from what I remember, approaching soon. So I'm gonna make my question related to that. In your case, because you've been here since the very beginning, like in hindsight and all, how does it feel like to witness something that you've started turn out to be like this? Like, watching it grow and such, would there have been anything else you would have done differently, or would you have not changed anything at all? Just in hindsight. I want to make this question a bit more personal to you, of course, if you don't mind answering that.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that we would I have done things differently? Yeah, if I knew everything I knew now, I would have done a lot of things differently. I think, asking that question, how can I help you? I didn't learn that on day one. I learned that probably in year 8. I wish I had learned that on day 1. That would have been very useful for initial meetings where I just came in with a bunch of asks and people kind of dismissed me. And it would have been really helpful to start by trying to understand, other people's priorities. So that was a miss and a learning. I think 2, I didn't really fully appreciate my own social identity being white, being male, how that shows up, basically biases that I would have that would show up whether I'm realizing it or not. The idea of like me needing to be at the center of everything, and we would do summits and I would be like the keynote speaker talking like 7 times during the summit. It's like, maybe you don't like, I had a colleague basically pull me aside and challenge me. And she, you know, she was like, Sam, like, again, heropreneurship is a problem. You're not the hero, like, relax. This is about a movement and a collective and a community. And there's so many different people to elevate and hear from. And so these are, you know, again, things that I learned on the journey that I wish I knew on day one, but I guess that was part of the process. Looking back on it 16 years in, I think, you know, if you ask any social entrepreneur, anyone like that, honestly, you always feel, at least for me, I always feel like I'm not satisfied. It's like, yeah, we've grown something from 11 fellows a year to 4,000 a year. We grew from, you know, 2 or 3 universities to 268 universities is great. And there are billions of young people on the planet. There are so many young people who are marginalized. There are so many young people who are like the innovators in their communities doing the work, but they're not getting funding or affirmation or support or community. So there's so much more to do. So where my mind is constantly at, yeah, like I'm looking backward to learn about mistakes and also what has worked, but I'm constantly looking forward to how do we take this to the next level, not just for MCN, not just for the Millennium Fellowship, but how do we build stronger infrastructure and scaffolding within the ecosystem to support more young leaders so that there's a time, I don't know if it's 5 or 50 years from now, but where programs like this, like collectively, all these programs are reaching millions of young people a year. And there are millions of young people a year who feel called in, who feel supported in their civic leadership, in their social impact, in their activism. Like that, the ripple effect of that, the positive impact that young people can have as partners in movements for a more just world, it would be transformative. So that's where my mind goes. I'm like looking backward, but also kind of looking forward. And then I'll just say, as a 37-year-old now, also just appreciating the present. Like, it's wild. I look at all of you and I'm like, oh my God, I was there. It felt like a moment ago that I was at university, like as an undergrad. And now here I am almost like half a lifetime later. It's really sometimes hard to wrap my head around how quickly these things change. And so I do, yeah, in that sense, I feel really in small ways, like proud or just excited that, you know, there's still a lot more to do, but we're contributing, and like we can always be better, and we need each other to become better. And I always ask for, like, that's why I gave my WhatsApp too, so you all can give me ideas and feedback on like how can the Millennium Fellowship be better. You know, we'll obviously have a survey at the end of the program to get your thoughts, invite those thoughts, but I'm always like looking for like how do we become better. And that's kind of just where my head's at.
Thank you for those inspiring comments, and that we can always improve from where we are now. And again, reminding us that we came from somewhere smaller and reached further. So I'm just going to invite Sam now to give us some closing remarks, and then we will close off the meeting.
Ayana, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for hosting. This has been honestly really very different actually than most webinars that I've done. Usually it's much more like technical, like I'm talking about here's the specific cold email to write and this is the specific follow-up to do to build your network, and those things are really important. But this time I've had this, you've created the space for me to be a little more personal and introspective, and I really appreciate that. again, I'm going to put my social and my WhatsApp in the chat. So anyone who wants to connect, you are most welcome. I invite that and would love to hear from you, would love to connect further, would love to be a resource. Tangibly, like I'll just say after graduation, assuming you successfully graduate the program and all that, fellows always reach out and need references or letters of recommendation, etc. Like reach out. In fact, I'll put my email, but I'll also put James's email, who helps me with these. And so you can reach out to us on that front. And if any of you are thinking like, oh, I'm trying to reach, I think that the challenge that I would leave you all with is, again, as you think about building your networks and your relationships, are there 3 different leaders that really inspire you? Are there 3 different organizations that really inspire you, that animate you and the work that you do and why you do what you do? If there are, I'd invite you to think about how you might build proximity with them, whether you use LinkedIn, whether you cold email them. If you send a cold email, don't write like a monologue, don't write like a long manifesto, keep it really short. I'm talking like 4 or 5 sentences, really short. Speak about them. Be like, hey, I watched your TED Talk, or I saw your recent talk on campus, or whatever it is, and spotlight that. Share in a sentence why that really resonated for you personally. Share in a sentence who you are, and then make an ask like, hey, I'd love, if you have time in your very busy schedule next month, like I'd love 30 minutes on, whether it's on a WhatsApp call or a Zoom or in person, just to like, because I want to model, I want to, my aspiration is to be where you are, and I want to learn how you got there. If you do that and you send that note, yes, like some people will not respond because they're too busy. All you need is like 1 or 2 to say yes. That's how you start to build that network. And then you keep them updated and you keep building the network. And then before you know it, you have a pretty big network. I'd encourage you to do that with people locally in your community. And I'd also encourage you to do that with the Millennium Fellowship. Like, you have thousands of peers around the world. If people resonate for you, reach out, connect. If webinar speakers resonate, reach out, connect. Don't wait a long time either. Magic rule I learned, and I'll share it some other time, but it's kind of what led us to meeting with President Obama in the White House. It was a fun story for another time. But when you follow up, if somebody really, you have a meeting or you meet somebody for the first time, don't wait like 3 weeks to follow up. Follow up within 24 hours. Like, it doesn't, again, short note, real short, but just connect with them authentically within 24 hours. Show that you're really connected. If you don't hear back, send them a follow-up note. These things don't always work, but when they do, they are life-changing. I've seen this happen with so many alums of our program. And so I would encourage that. And if any of you choose to do that kind of outreach with me or with others, I'd love to hear how it goes. So I'm here. I'm a resource. I'm back from leave. I'm all in. I'm here for you. And we're super excited for graduation next Friday. That's gonna, I mean, as big as this one, I can't believe there are like almost probably about 500 people on here today. But there's going to be thousands on, all of you, and thousands more peers around the world with global leaders, and really excited to celebrate graduation with you. I know we're going to be sharing the survey. We also shared an impact tool that's optional. Would highly, I can't tell you exactly why, but I would highly recommend trying it out. And then if you do, feel free again to let me know, because thinking about monitoring and evaluation and impact measurement is something we're really passionate about and exploring. And then if you have more ideas or ways we can be supportive, we're here for you. And I hope if any of you are undergrads, I'm sure many are next year, apply for the Millennium Fellowship now, because class of 2024 is open. and oftentimes campus directors were Millennium Fellows the year prior. And so that's leadership I'd love to invite. Thank you. Thank you, Ayana. Thank you, everybody. It's been such a joy. And we'll connect again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very grateful for your encouraging words, encouraging us to continue working as student leaders, as young people, and for encouraging us to reach out and not to be afraid to seek out mentors and other forms of networking. So thank you for taking up your time to be here with us today to deliver us this very positive and inspirational message. And we look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you guys for all coming out today. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day or night, depending on where you are. Bye.